Welcome back to another Mosaic.org tutorial. Today we're going to be talking more about the facial nerve, and specifically we're going to be talking about its intratemporal course. As the facial nerve goes through the temporal bone, the bony canal that it sits in is the longest bony canal for any nerve in the body, and it's about 30 millimeters long. The way that you describe it is by breaking it up into its three segments. So those three segments are the labyrinthine segment, the tympanic segment, and the mastoid segment. And just to give you overview, the canal begins at the meatal foramen, and the meatal foramen is in the fundus, or the end, of the internal auditory canal, and the end of that internal auditory canal has four different quadrants, and the meatal foramen for the facial nerve is the anterior superior quadrant. So the facial canal, also known as the fallopian canal, which is all of this, begins at the meatal foramen, at the end of the internal auditory canal, and it ends at the stylomastoid foramen, which is a small hole between the styloid process and the mastoid. So the labyrinthine section is the first section of the facial canal, and the labyrinthine section is also the shortest and the thinnest. So it's only about 2/3 of a millimeter wide, and it's about 3 to 5 millimeters long. And this section of the facial canal is essentially just an extension of the same course that the nerve was taking as it was going through the internal auditory canal. So here's the nerve going through the internal auditory canal, and as it comes out the meatal foramen, it continues to run basically in the same direction for about 3 to 5 millimeters. And if you were to say that it changed direction just slightly, you could say that it went just a little bit more anterior. Some people say that during this section, if this is the petrous ridge of the temporal bone, they say that it's basically running anterior laterally just at about kind of 90 degrees to the petrous ridge of the temporal bone. So it does that for 3 to 5 millimeters. And at its end, when it ends, it's abutting the medial wall of the epitympanic recess. So it's abutting the medial wall of the middle ear. And what it's related to in this labyrinthine section is it's related to the vestibulocochlear apparatus. So the cochlea is sitting just anterior, the semicircular canals are sitting just posterior, and the nerve is actually running over the vestibule of the vestibulocochlear apparatus that's joining the cochlea and the semicircular canals. It's running just over the top of the vestibule, over the middle of the vestibulocochlear apparatus. And what's sitting above it is just a very small, thin slice of bone that's separating it from the middle cranial fossa. When the nerve reaches that epitympanic recess, it then makes a turn backwards. And that turn backwards is where the geniculate ganglion is, and that also signals the start of the second portion of the facial nerve, the tympanic segment.